Hi everyone, we're at the top of Sacre-Cœur again. We started here, I think it's only fitting that we finish here. It's our last episode of Inside the Circle for the duration of this Olympics. I know it's gone past so quickly. We're going to recap the games and see if any of those predictions we made at the start actually came true. We do hope you enjoy.
Welcome everybody and welcome back to the Olympic recap episode. And once again, I've been joined by everybody. We've all made the effort of making it today. And we've got Simon over in Woking and I've got Alan beside me for a change, which is fantastic.
Good to be here.
Absolutely. And I think the best way to sort of start off this Olympic recap episode is really just going, the Olympics is all about showcasing the sport at being played at the highest level. Do we think hockey achieved that during these games?
I think the more important question before we get to that, Sam, is actually, are Alan and I happy to be back in our offices as opposed to being in Paris?
Paris was a bit warmer than what we've got here at the minute. We've got the liquid sunshine here at the minute, but good to be back to the chaos. Yeah, okay.
But your actual question, sorry, I'm being facetious. Your actual question, Sam,
I think, as an overall thing, I think these games were just look spectacular. I think London did a fantastic job of making the place look fantastic, but I actually think Paris did a better job. I think they used their landmarks superbly and everything else. I thought they did a great job on that. And some of the games, Rugby sevens to break all world records for that, for attendances and different things. They were a bit clever on it, knowing that there was a fair chance that Dupont was maybe going to win a gold medal with France to start with. So pretty clever there. But I think overall, it was a fantastic, spectacle of sport at the highest levels. You were at the hockey every day, Simon. What were your thoughts on that?
The hockey I thought was exceptional. I thought they got the venue exactly right in terms of size. I know there was some comments on sort of social media and various people about how many empty seats there were, but actually in terms of ticket sales, and that's kind of the only number you can go by, ticket sales, I think there was something like there was 340,000 tickets available to purchase and only 2,500 that went unsold. So those seats were empty, but at times it was people coming in for half a session. They only want to come in for a bit of a game. And that's always the things with the games. They are, as in the Olympic Games, they're so busy. People will buy a ticket, see what they want to see, and then they'll go and see something else. And those sessions might overlap. It's not a pure hockey audience. It's a sports audience. And I think the sports audience were treated to some incredible things. And I've got friends involved in the hockey administration, and even just up there, they had something like, 25,000 people went through the hockey initiation area, which is more than the French adult hockey population in one tournament. So the exposure of people to hockey was just insane. It was absolutely incredible. And they were going through the front gate and they were knocking a ball around. It was hilarious to watch because you had adults having a go with sticks with no instruction and smashing a little light ball around, and it was brilliant. And they had some proper VIPs. They had Indian cricketers who turned up. They had politicians and all sorts. So I think as a showcasing hockey, I think they did brilliantly. I think the atmosphere in the hockey stadium was amazing. But I'm with you, Alan. I think that they were clever in scheduling. They were clever in venues. And the iconic one is always going to be the beach volleyball with the Eiffel Tower behind it. And some of those pictures with when the weather was nice with the sunset going down, and they will be on people's walls forevermore. So yeah, I think as a city, they did it really, really well.
Yeah, I as you say, some of the venues were phenomenal. The Grand Palais, just for the presence of the sports that were in that, and just the look and the feel of the place was phenomenal. Even just walking around the streets, it felt just another level up from London, unfortunately. But I'm not sure anybody's going to top that. I really think there'll be no other games are going to use their iconic venues like that. I really don't think so. I think LA is going to struggle a bit.
Yeah, because it's got different venues. That's the thing. I think you look at cities. So what have we got? We got LA in 28, Brisbane 32. Yeah, Lisbon 32. And whilst the people of those cities and those countries are proud of those cities, they are not iconic landmarked cities.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the problem. The games will be fantastic. I'm absolutely certain, for different reasons. If only
totally.
Tom Cruise will throw himself off the top of every single building in LA on a 15-minute rotation, just for giggles. There'll be a lot of Hollywood in Hollywood, etc. But I think Paris is the one thing I found interesting, though. Alan, you were there and you went around more venues than I did. It felt like, and I know they do, so on that first Saturday in August, historically, basically all Parisians leave Paris to go on holiday for a month. And I think that is what it felt like. And therefore, I think the city felt, between venues, the city felt relatively empty. That's not a bad thing from a transport and logistics perspective, but it meant that kind of there wasn't the street side vibe from an Olympic Games. I think London had more than that. I think certainly some places in Rio had more than that. Obviously Tokyo didn't for COVID reasons, but that was the one thing that I found interesting, was that the Olympics didn't feel like it was spread across the city. It felt like it was spread across several venues around the city. But when you went between them, there was very little. It wasn't the high-fiving atmospheric volunteer network, for example. That was only very much around the specific venues. So, and I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying it was different to other cities. So that was my only observation there.
It was basically where London had clusters of venues and events where you got an atmosphere, as you said, on the street, on the public transport. It really was very different. I mean, it was get onto a train. You know, for me to get to the hockey was a 2-hour trip, door to door, 2 hours. And, you know, there wasn't, you were just moving through the city. I agree. I think that I think the Parisians probably have regretted leaving Paris, because they missed so much. I mean, even just when the games were over at night and everything else that happened, you know, when the events finished was phenomenal. It was really, really good. And as I say, Paris used its skyline to best effect. Do you think there'll be much of a legacy from the hockey left in Paris, really? I mean, I sense it could be very difficult for them. Obviously an Olympics is, you know, they talk about legacy, but I'm not sure, you know, French hockey might get a massive kick from it. You never know.
Obviously the facility that they're going to have. So pitch 2 is going to become their national centre. And the pitch, the turf that was there, the infrastructure they put around it, the building stuff, will be a significant step up for French hockey. The Olympics themselves, from point of when they were given the games, obviously that is always a catalyst, and you see that expansion. A little bit depends on how they can create some sort of legacy. The problem for France is, as with many other countries, it's so big. So kind of the whole National League concept, etc., is almost impossible to run, because there isn't the money to do the flight you would need from the south of France to the north of France, or a long train ride, etc. That just doesn't happen. So you don't get that depth of exposure across the country. So I think that will be challenging, which is why a majority of the French athletes play in Belgium or in Holland primarily. There is a Parisian league, and I think that Parisian league might see a nice little bubble of interest over the next 2 or 3 years. Whether it fundamentally shifts hockey's place in France's sporting identity, I'm going to go with no, because it's just not. We are what we are as a sport. In the nations where we are embedded in the psyche, you look at the Netherlands, for example, the hockey is one of their sports. India, for example, I mean, Pakistan on a lower level, but from a men's hockey perspective, it's in their culture. Yes. That's what it is. And therefore you see that bubble and it increases. But I don't think, historically, if I look back across the games, I don't think there's any country that's a lower ranked hockey nation that has seen a significant shift in their hockey because of the Olympic Games. If you look back through, so if we just go back through the ones in memory, so Tokyo, that had that made no difference. Rio didn't change. Brazil, London didn't change. There was massive peak of numbers, but the number spike has now flattened back down to pretty much where it was. Beijing didn't change their hockey culture. Athens definitely didn't change Greek culture. I don't think it's been played in since about 3 days after the competition. Sydney is a strong Australian. Atlanta didn't change the USA. So 92 Barcelona already had hockey, but it didn't. I don't think it fundamentally shifted it. So I just think you see bubbles, and it stabilizes and it increases awareness, and therefore it probably puts it into a better, more stable position. And with a competition like the one we've seen, which was so good, I think that helps because it puts it into the psyche of sports administration. And annoyingly, whilst that sounds like a really bland statement, that's a really important thing for our sport, is to be high up the sports administrator's mental list of things that are exciting and moments that they've seen. So I think it was a great games for hockey.
Yes.
Whether it changes French hockey, I don't think it'll have a massive impact.
I agree. I don't think there's going to be much. As you say, they might get a bit of a short-term bubble with interest, but I'd say the infrastructure's not there even just to support that.
Well, walking around the streets of Banbridge was lovely too, I must say. It was great. It was the same. It wasn't maybe quite as
a lot of our people here in Banbridge were winning gold medals and stuff like that there for Ireland and GB. So we'll take that.
True. I know, absolutely. Going on the surprise that many Banbridge people actually won a couple of medals. What do we think was the biggest shock? Shock or surprise during these hockey games? Mine was definitely how well China did. I think we bar you throwing them in as sheer luck.
It wasn't sheer luck.
Analytic mastermind, I'm sure. I think my view on them going in was they'll do well. They're a strong enough team. They'll probably come middle of the table. They might get into the knockouts. Who knows? But the fact that I think how well they built through the group games into the knockouts, and then from the knockouts they played some of their best hockey, and even in the final, getting a silver medal was just fantastic for them. And I think it's definitely my biggest surprise on how well they did do.
I was lucky. Obviously, I met up with you. I mean, for me, India GB match that I watched was the surprise because two things happened. One, obviously, three, the red card. And at that point, I thought GB have got this. They were attacking. And the real surprise was they just didn't change anything. They just kept doing the same thing, repeat. And then the other surprise was India holding their cool and playing a really solid game, not cracking up. You've seen it before. The Indians can internally explode. And I thought they kept their heads coolly. They defended superbly. They defended as a unit. Yes, they parked the bus a little bit, but then they had the confidence to come up the pitch a bit more. And that was the surprise, because I really thought, within I think it was in the first quarter, wasn't it, Simon? I think the red card. I mean, they played a long
5 minutes into the second quarter, so they played 40 minutes, 10 minutes.
Yeah. And therefore, I mean, to me, that was the surprise from a point of view of, as I said, the Indians not imploding and GB just not coming up with anything at all. And it was obviously a really disappointing result for us, just not to get through to the next round. But India finished well.
They did. I think another surprise was, and it shows in the picks that we made of teams to go through, was that neither Australian or Belgian men made the semis.
Yes.
I think I had a conversation, albeit slightly heated conversation on social media with somebody about Australia and India in different ways, and I then had to go data driven and stats and stuff. And the Australians, they made more chances than just about anybody in the whole pool stages. They also hit the metalwork something like 9 times. 9 times. I mean, that game where they got beaten by Belgium 6-2, everybody's like, oh, that showed how bad they were. No, the stats for penalty corner attack were less than 20% over the tournament, and yet Belgium scored 4 out of 6. So they hit 66% in one game, and Australia hit the post 3 times.
Yeah.
So you look at that and you go, well, on a different day, that's not a 6-2 game. That's not a statistic of that. That's not true. They're not wrong words. That's not a representation of that game. The scoreline isn't what that game was.
Yes.
I know it is because that's what the end result was, but you see my point. It wasn't how bad the Australians were playing. It's the fact that it was a lucky day. And we've all seen games. I've played in several of them where you kind of lose by half a dozen. And I genuinely mean this. You lose by half a dozen and go, but we weren't that bad.
Yeah.
Everything that happened fell on the end of a stick and it stuck absolutely dead. I made the criticism of the GB women in and around the circle is that any ball that was passed in didn't stick. It didn't hit the end of a stick and stay dead and then get shot away. It half bounced off, etc. But yet in a different game, it did stick. And they're the tiny moments that as a player and as a goalkeeper, you go, yep, today's my day. And for Australia, it just kind of wasn't their day in the tiny, finite little moments. So I think for neither them nor Belgium to make it into the final four, I think was one of my biggest shocks. The Chinese, we focused on that as a shock because it was a positive thing. And I think they got through playing very cleverly, playing to their strengths. And Alison and Nan did that brilliantly. But yeah, I think look at the other side of the draw. I think my shock was that neither Australia nor Belgium got through.
Yeah.
And just you mentioned penalty corners. I mean, it was something we talked about most nights. The conversion rate on penalty corners for this game was it seemed really, really bad. And it just did, teams were getting penalty corners, and whether it was the number one runner out or whether the thing just didn't break down, I'm not sure. I also saw too many differences. I thought each team had about 3 penalty corner routines and that was it. Usually for things, I guess here, if we get through the next stage, we'll pull out another 2 or 3 routines. There didn't seem to be any of that, and penalty corners were going awry, as you say,
Quite often.
Quite a bit.
I mean, I agree with what you said. So you go back to the data, the conversion rate was below 20%. And that's the first time in any major competition in the last 16 years, it's not been that low at any point. There were some big corners scored. Yeah. And so, Harmonpree scored a couple of very important corners. So penalty corners did seem to dictate the outcomes of games. But if you then look at how many penalty corners were needed to give the one that was then converted, that's the really for me, that's the really interesting thing is I'll stay with Harmonpree because I can't remember which game it was. Maybe it was it wasn't the quarterfinal because he scored early in the quarterfinal. It was in the bronze medal game. He scored 2 goals in the bronze medal game, I think.
Yep.
But in order to score those 2 goals, he'd had 10 or something, and they just persisted with the same routine all the time. And he eventually scored, but the stats were so low. And I think it was a combination of 3 things. I think in the beginning, I thought it was a slow pitch, but it wasn't because the data people timed it and the injection of the trap was the same. Some of the stopping percentages were down, so there was more errors on the top of the circle.
Yeah.
Without a shadow of a doubt in the men's and women's game, the number one runners are now incredible.
Yes.
When you have your number one runner on, it does make a difference, and that's one of the arguments that the Indian hockey community make about that suspension from Amit Rahidas going over into the semi-final game that they lost, was they didn't have him as a number one runner.
Yeah.
And therefore Payat can do what Payat does, which is fine, fair point.
Yep.
And then also I do think, to give them credit, I think we had some outstanding goalkeeping performances.
Yeah.
You look at the saves that were made behind the number one runners across both the men's and women's competitions. I didn't see, we see the goalkeepers get beaten near their feet, near their hands by powerful shots. We saw far fewer of those. The goals that were scored were good goals.
Yes.
They weren't through the goalkeeper's space, and so it felt like there was far less errors. Not errors, that's not true, because the ball goes incredibly hard. There were far less goals scored through the goalkeeper's saving space than we have seen across tournaments. So all of those things together, exceptional goalkeeping, great number one running, a few errors, meant the stats were much lower, which then, Alan, comes back to something I agree with you completely. I just do not understand the lack of variation.
Yes.
That exists in terms of being able to manipulate defences. And I know that if you want to simplify it, injection, stop and flick is 3 closed skills, therefore you remove the error potential. But if I look at delivery, and I'll go back this as a historical reference point, and I'll happily get pulled apart. When I played for Reading 21 years ago, when we did well for a while, 21 years ago, we ran 3 blocks of 3, and we had 3 colours, and you had red and green and blue, and you had 3 routines, so red 1, 2, 3, etc. So you had 9. You had a matrix of 9, and that matrix was designed because we didn't have a world-class flicker when that was designed. At the end of it, we had Richard Mantell, which was great, but at the beginning, we didn't have that. Yeah. So we had variations. So you had, one of them was everything would go to the slip. So I can't remember which colour it was. Let's say it's red. So red went to the slip, went to the top, was stopped, and went to the slip. So red 1 was a slip flick. Red 2 was a penalty spot deflection off a slip flick. And red 3 was a far post off a slip flick. And you sequence those corners. And therefore the first one, because it's a slip, you get a runner who will anticipate that and go into that channel. And then you go down that runner's left foot to penalty spot. And that draws the second defender in narrow. So then you go wide and you manipulate space. And I look at it and I go, if you're working on the principle that you think you might get on average 8 or 9 corners a game, why keep doing the same thing? And this is any team. This isn't a reflection on a particular nation, but I do find it really interesting that there isn't more variety, particularly in the men's. In the women's, you do get a bit more variety. You get a few more back to the injector. You get a few more footside, sort of an R2 tip in. But I just wonder. I wonder if a team got creative, whether there be something. And you're right, Alan. You said it used to be the Germans. You always knew, you get to a semi-final, 5 minutes to go, a 4-pass behind the back random thing would be executed with delightful precision, and everybody would go, "There it is." Because you kind of knew it was coming. Yeah. And it would,
the only change I saw was, in the Dutch women, Janssen started at semi-finals and in the final started going back post for tip in. That was the only change, because they didn't play that during they didn't seem to play that during the pool stages. They had that up their sleeve. But still, I thought the conversion rate was, as you've said, was one of the worst. I really thought it wasn't great. Goalkeepers did play some great saves, some really good, as you say, shots. The other thing that I thought was there was no real net busters. They were all backboard height. That's sort of 6-8 inches off the ground into the corner placement drag flicks, if anything.
There was some absolute rockets into the roof, but they were few and far between compared to probably
the corners
what we've seen before.
Yeah. And taking that on then, from an umpiring point of view, what did you think of it? I thought the standard was extremely high. There was maybe one match that was maybe a below par, I thought, but I mean, I thought overall the umpiring was very, very good. I also have to say I'm delighted, and we've been doing it for years. Is female and male umpires doing the opposite sex matches, if that makes sense. We've been doing it for quite a while. I think other sports are starting to realize that it's an equal playing field. If they've got the skills, they should be able to umpire at both men's and ladies levels. And I thought it was noticeable at this games more so. And again, I think because it's an Olympic Games, it also shows the sport off well from an umpiring point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's so many. There's almost so many complexities and talking points about the whole male-female umpires and stuff, and I think we're lucky enough as a sport to almost be beyond the conversation. And that's not dismissing what the statement that you've made in any way. I completely respect it, but I just think we've now done it for so long. We go, this is what happens, and therefore it's a shoulder shrug, and we get the best umpires on the turf. I do think that expanding it beyond top level is a challenge. Yeah, because I think if you go back to club hockey, I think there is a significantly different physical dynamic between men's and women's club hockey. And so consequently, looking at taking female club umpires in the majority, and that's why I have to be very careful because there are some exceptional female club umpires. However, the pace of the game means that there would have to be a specific concerted kind of almost training program in terms of positioning and understanding the pace of it, because there are two very, very, very different skill sets on a Saturday afternoon in general club hockey. And I think we have to recognise that is really important. And some of the reasons that the top umpires are so good is because they are fit and they're in the right place. And if you're in the right place, you can make the right decision because you've got the right vision lines. So there are complexities around it, but I agree with you wholeheartedly. The whole dynamic of equal opportunities for both genders across our umpiring is fabulous.
But I think because it's the Olympics, I think it shows it. You know, we don't. I think in the hockey world, the hockey person knows that we have this, but I think just showing it in the Olympics where you have sport interested people, I think it just shows it off in a better light, as you rightly say. I mean, you know, it's something we don't need to talk about, but I just think it just shows the world where we are within our sport.
Yeah, I agree. And going back to the question about how was it, I think on field, I think was exceptional.
Yes.
On field, I think was superb. And there will always be moments, and teams will criticize specific moments. And there were mistakes. Umpires made mistakes, in my opinion, on field, but no more or less than the players make mistakes. And I think that's how you have to quantify it and look at it or qualify it. And look at it and go, right, if we're expecting perfection, a team can't expect perfection. If an umpire, if in a game I get 30 touches, then am I perfect for my 30 touches? Because the umpire is going to get 200 moments of mental process and umpiring. And you go, well, what is fair and reasonable to expect? And in a crowded circle, do I or don't I see a foot? And if I don't, then that's why we have the video referral system, because it is as important as it is to help with those processes. So I think on field, it was as high a standard, if not higher, than I've seen at any international tournament. However, there were moments that everybody will see and will go, oh, but that wasn't, and that wasn't. But we can't focus on those because that's A, human nature, and B, the nature of the game. You can't see everything all the time. I think that the video umpiring is an interesting one. And I don't think the video umpiring matched the standard of the on-field umpiring. And the reason, in my opinion, for that is I think the video umpires potentially are looking for the wrong thing. And they're either being told something very specific. And what I mean by that is I think they're trying to find a single image that proves or disproves an action.
Yes.
And I'll say very clearly is that when I'm doing the commentary work, etc., is you'll have several different angles. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to describe a picture and come to a logical consensus of what could happen. So if I see one angle and something is happening, we've gone to video umpire and something is being requested, and we're saying, did it hit, let's use this as an example, did it hit a stick or a foot? Okay, so in image one, frame one, the stick is at waist height and the ball is on the floor. Okay, so by definition, the stick can't influence the ball. In frame two, it's been cut in a way that all you can see is legs downwards. So you can't even see the stick in the frame. But frame one has already told us that it's not the frame, the stick isn't obscured by the body. And we can see, however, so imagine that we're looking from behind a player so we can see the calves on the back of their legs and the ball is coming towards their left leg. And it then deflects and goes left, further left. So we can see a deviation in line of ball. Now, a ball can't move in midair without touching something, and we've proved in frame one that the stick wasn't involved. And yet, because the umpire cannot see the ball contacting the shin because the camera angle is from behind the body, the response that's coming back is no clear reason or no advice possible. However, I understand. I can't see the ball hitting the shin because I'm looking from behind the player. But physics and common sense says it's not a stick and it's changed direction. Therefore, it has to have hit the foot. And that is, I believe, the process that your person sitting on the sofa is going, well, but it is a foot, because common sense and logic. But I don't know what the instructions are, but it feels like the instructions are you have to show that change, and the angle isn't there to show it. And so people are coming back with no advice possible, no clear reason to change your decision. And that, unfortunately, I think is what's impacting on the success rate and also the opinion of video umpiring.
Because it almost felt like on those occasions, they were almost going, I don't want to be crucified for going, oh, it's hit a foot, when I couldn't see it actually hitting the foot. That, no one find rightly how, short corner, let's take that as being for a short corner, which it must be. Those are a huge part of the game, and in normal circumstances, the success rate of those is much higher. So therefore, it's a big bearing on the game. It's a group game that leads to someone going into the quarterfinals. It's, the quarterfinals, semifinals, final. They don't want to be maybe responsible knowing how bad VAR in the football is going. It's very quick to jump on and going, well, that was obviously the video umpire's fault. They didn't do this, and this. While maybe approaching it in that logical sense might actually cut those conversations out.
Mm-hmm. The thing is that the umpires made a decision. For example, it's a goal, and then they go, they've got no clear evidence, so therefore it's a goal, and actually it was never a goal in the first place, and it has a massive knock-on effect. On the positive side, I think when some of the guys got it right, they made the decision very, very quickly and moved on. They saw one shot and went, it's hit a foot, it's a foot, play on, or it's a free out, or it's a goal or a short corner. I thought they made those decisions quite quickly, the easy ones, very quickly, and moved on and kept the game going.
Yeah, and that's always the difficulty of it, because the game wants to move on quickly, and we don't want a 3-minute video referral process. I then feel that sometimes it got too quick, and we'd see one thing. And I know that from a TV perspective, that I will happily nail my colours to the mast on replay 1, and I'll reinforce it on replay 2, and I'll state exactly what the outcome should be, in my opinion. And then they'll play replay 3, and I'll go, oh, I'm completely wrong. So I do think there is a kind of a 30-second, can I see 3 angles for 10 seconds for 30 seconds, and you're going to get no response in 30 seconds unless it's an obvious first one, bang, it hits a foot and away you go. So I think it's more about the process and the technology, because I then think that there is a rugby-esque conversation to be had.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're getting better. And I liked how the umpires at times would just ask for clarification, or they'll say, I've seen it on the big screen. Are you sure about that? This is what I can see. And they're also, the on-field umpires were also asking for their own referrals. It felt more.
Yeah.
And I like that. Alan, I agree with you. I think the fact that they've given a goal. So I kind of look at that and go, well, can you overrule that if it's obviously, you see what I mean? If you give a goal and then you go no advice possible, a goal stands, even though, go back to my logical scenario, the world has looked at it and gone, well, it's just not a goal. But because there isn't a clear single picture of that ball hitting a foot, even though it's changed direction, the process that has been adhered to comes out with the wrong outcome. And so I just think there's a little bit of work for us to do in terms of what the language is, how we communicate between umpires. That's then a technology question about, can you have two-way communication? Is it on the big screen, etc. But I think we're in a good place because we've got the tech and we're doing it in a good way. The advice, the language they're using, I have advice for you, is really important, because that means the on-field umpire, if they want to, can go with it. Can not go with it. They can stand by their own decision, and that's happened a few times. It's brave, but it has happened, and I think it should have the opportunity to happen. I mean, look, it's a sport that is playing increasingly quickly, being played increasingly quickly. without 3, 4, 5 camera angles and super slow-mo, etc., it's difficult to pick things up. People laugh at me, I am paid to have an opinion as a commentator, and I reckon my success rate is about 50%. So you could argue you may as well toss a coin. Now, I would argue it in slightly different phrasing that I think the 50% that I am wrong compared to the video umpire, I'm going to sound very arrogant. I think I am right a percentage of that time, and I think the video umpires are wrong. But that's just because I think I look at it in the way we've just described across several frames of action, and I don't need, because my position isn't dictated by having to show it in proof. Therefore, I think I'm stating what the people on the sofa are stating.
Yes. Yeah.
And the video umpires aren't allowed to do that because that's the nature of the instructions that they're given. So, but the final point on that, however, is I think the FIH should look at the age restrictions on umpires and video umpires, and I think they should go back to having specialists. I don't think you can just put an on-field umpire into a box and expect them to be as competent as they are on-field, because they are umpiring on-field every weekend all the way through the year. So they do 50, 60, 100 games. And then every 15 games, they're thrown in a box with a different set of technology and gone, can you come up with an answer? When they might not have a natural language director. They might not have super slow-mo. They might not have this, that, and the other. So you're asking someone to literally maybe they'll have had a briefing, but they might not have been in a box and done video umpiring for 2 months. And then we're suddenly asking them to make this superb thing. And I know there's cost implications of the whole thing, but I just think there are, at major tournaments, we want the best people doing the best things. And so if you have a person who is clearly, and there are several who are very, very good at video umpiring, then maybe they have to do video umpiring more than anybody else, because that's how you get the best outcomes. So maybe there's an argument at major tournaments to have dedicated video umpires, in that manner.
I think also they'll then get a feel that they'll then know that stick was in the air, the ball deviated, it's hit something. So, worst case, it's a bully and the results nullified or whatever else. But I think then you'll get somebody who then goes, I feel, I know that ball has deviated and the angles are showing me that there's no stick involved. So therefore it had to be a foot or leg, So
I think not want to get hung up too long, but I just think, however, the conversation about what we want the outcome to be has to be an open conversation between umpires, players, coaches, and television. I don't think a particular community can dictate an outcome, and I'm not in any way going to get hung up on it now. We definitely shouldn't go into it, but the same point exists in terms of how you get, excuse me, I've got a telephone ringing in the back of my office that just doesn't ever ring at all. Apologies for that. So you've got the umpire's ringing me straight away after that. The other one is overheads. And let's not get caught up with overheads, but I think the single most contentious decision anywhere at the moment, contentious set of decisions, are about overheads and how overheads are blown or not. And I think that does need a little bit of a look, because the outcomes from almost subconscious defensive errors, so not conscious errors, but aerial overheads into the circle is what I'm talking about. And I think specifically overheads into the circle between the 23s or even into the 23s, I think you can kind of go, it is what it is. And we'll blow that based on the merits of danger. But the in the circle stuff at top level, giving players enough space to almost have a completely uncontested shot, or on the other hand, giving away corners and strokes for the natural reaction of, I can get that if I take half a pace backwards. Oh, hang on, I'm now within 2 meters. I'm not 1.5 meters. I'm 3 meters. And I just think that's something we need to look at, because I think the outcomes aren't great. But let's not get hung up on that, because we could spend another hour on it.
I'll be honest. So, I'm dreading asking this question, knowing fine rightly who's sitting beside me and how smug he's going to be. We obviously all picked our top 4 teams going into the men's and women's competition. And looking back on it now, how do we feel about the picks that we made? So just a quick recap on the men's side of things. I'd picked Australia, Ireland, Netherlands, Belgium. Simon, you had Australia, GB, Netherlands, Belgium, and Alan decided to throw in the mix of Germany, Netherlands, Australia, and Belgium. And it came to the fact that Netherlands, Germany, India, and Spain were the final four. We got it wrong.
I think I did mention Spain in mine as well.
Sure
But
you mentioned it in passing. You went, "Oh, it's."
I think
a
I mentioned
country."
every team. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, obviously our success rate is limited.
Yes.
But I think what we also said in the men's competition is that there were 7 or 8 teams who could all medal.
Yeah.
I think the nature of some of the performances meant that we obviously got it wrong. I said my greatest surprise was that neither Australia nor Belgium progressed from the quarters to the semis. The nature of the GB India game was really interesting because I think I've said this and I will stand by it. I think if it had been 11-on-11, having watched how GB had played through the pool and how India had they beaten Australia in that last pool game, but some of their other games were quite tight. Yeah. In my opinion, based on what I saw through the pools, I think Great Britain would have won 11-on-11 on an open game.
Yes.
But Alan, I'm with you. I think it was one of my standout performances of the games was the Indian defence in the quarterfinal. Midway through quarter 3, there were 3 decisions that went against India in a row within about 90 seconds. And historically, they would have imploded. Historically, there'd have been corners and cards in a very short period of time. And I think Great Britain historically in other times would have won that game. I think the Indian defence was that 40 minutes was singularly the best defensive performance in the men's competition. And I say that specifically because I think the Chinese defence to get them to the finals was similarly impressive. So I think it was amazing. But I think in an open game, it would have been a different outcome. But it just shows how open it was. For me, the surprise was still the Spanish. I think that was incredible. For them to make the top 4 was exceptional. And they'll be delighted with it. But yeah, it obviously shows you can't predict.
Yeah, we had the conversation in that sort of halfway point, the call that we had, and we were talking about the men's quarterfinals, and you just said Spain would have had to have the best game of their lives. The keeper would have had to have the best game of his life. And they clearly were listening because they did. You know, the keeper was fantastic that quarterfinal match. So it really does show, like we've said throughout, like the men's tournament is so unbelievably tight, and it does just take a performance from one person, couple of people, just to boost the team going into a knockout match, into a critical group match, and it changes everything.
Yeah, and I think if you then go into the women's we felt was more predictable, and that goes to show because we all picked 3.
Yes.
Did I pick 3 or did Alan pick all 4?
No, he picked 3.
I picked GB.
He 3 and GB.
That was my disaster.
Yeah, I think most of you both threw a wild card in at some point. I think Sam, you chucked in Ireland for the men's, and Alan, you chucked in GB for the women's. And so, whilst my outcomes were no better than yours, I didn't chuck any wild cards into mine. But yeah, I think the women's, obviously, the Netherlands, and I've been again criticised. I made the statement that I felt. What did I say? I said that I think the Netherlands women won without ever being outstanding.
Yeah.
And I still stand by that. I have seen the Netherlands women play, and I've seen them play badly, and I've seen them really struggle in terms of in Pro League, where they've kind of not got an early goal and it's never really opened, and they've got a little bit frustrated. I think they've matured beyond that, and they have a belief that they will win stuff. But at no point in the competition did we see a dominant Netherlands turn an opponent over with some exciting kind of tournament standout goals and fabulous interplays and team finishes and bits and pieces. There was some great stuff, but I don't think they ever needed to hit top gear to win. And then, so even if we look at the final, and then they were not able to play at top gear against China because of the way that China played. And so therefore you get frustrated by that deep defence. They weren't given enough space and time. China's one-on-one defence was outstanding. So consequently, the Netherlands won gold without finding fifth gear or top gear, whatever you want to call it. But I think that the women's competition was more predictable. We kind of, two of us, Sam, you and I both talked about Belgian women because they've been up and coming. And whilst I think they were disappointing in the latter stages, I don't think they believed in themselves enough. And that showed in how well they played. I think Australia losing to China. I mean, China just knew what they were trying to do and they defended incredibly well. And they defended and they took their chances. Argentina, they were a disappointment to me because when they went up against, I felt they were the only team that could probably give the Netherlands an open game, like a proper full-on game. And yet the body language of the players in that final game when they played, it just wasn't there. It just wasn't, there wasn't a belief. There wasn't a, let's give this a go. You didn't have Granato, Albertari, Trincinetti bossing any part of that game. And it was just, oh, really? This is your chance. This is your chance to go out and give it a crack. It's the Olympic Games. Just, it didn't quite work. But I do think from the fact that we kind of predicted more of the teams better, that I think the women's competition was a little bit more predictable with the exception of that Chinese outcome. I'm not going to say upset, outcome. Get my language right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think the Chinese performance was really top class in that final. I think any questions of how Alice Annan was going to go over and get these guys to do anything, I think was very much answered in the fact that, well, she got them to the final, she got them a silver medal. And I think it's the happiest I've ever seen her as well, to be honest. As soon as she got to that final, I think she was smiling from straight away and she was just happy to be there. And you could see at the end, she was, yes, there was a bit of disappointment, but she was just going around going, look, we've won a silver medal. We were not expected to be anywhere near this. We knew how good we were, but I think to finally go out and show everyone that, this is how well we can play against effectively most dominant team in the world, just proves it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the other thing I was going to say was, I mean, in a few of the last couple of games, I've felt that some of the players, I know whether it was the pressure they were under or whatever else, but there's a few more just heated moments in the last sort of knockout matches. I thought, there was a lot more pushing and shoving and a few more times that the umpires had to step in to sort of separate a few players, which is sad to see, but the pressure obviously of the games have really sort of brought that on a bit.
Yeah. There was moments of controversy that will stand out in people's minds.
Yep.
And I'm not going to give air to the one from the final because I dislike it. Therefore, I'm not going to give air to that. I think there was the Belgium-China one right at the end of the game where the Chinese player hit the ball into the Belgian player, and there's a lot of people saying that's deliberate, should be a red card, etc. And was it after the whistle, so you can't give yellow cards, all those sort of things. And I have my interpretation of that is that the ball was hit pretty much on/just after the whistle. It's a game that China were desperate to win, obviously. They're trying to clear their lines. The hit is aimed at goal, albeit through a player, so they're trying to get it off the other end of the pitch. It was lifted, but you can't in any way say that the player tried to lift it into an opponent because you don't know what's in their head. If they'd walked up and wrapped a stick around the back of the opponent's body, then fine, red card, get off. But at that moment, it is dangerous play. But that's exactly the same. That's exactly the same interpretation that if I hit the ball after the whistle in the circle at goal into a defender, I would expect to get a long yellow card because it's dangerous play. But it's not. I'm not deliberately trying to hit it into an opponent. There is the match scenario that suggests that ball was hit in a way that was dangerous, but you can't turn that into a red card. At the same time, unfortunately, the reaction of Judith van der Meulen to put her hands up onto an opponent, I can see why it's been done, but the fact that it is done doesn't make it acceptable, and therefore that's also a card within the rules. So the whole double yellow thing, you look at it and go, well, yeah, unfortunately, it's a player reaction on a player, and I think the discipline side of things, the cards that were given out were reasonable. Like Christopher Ruhr, he got the yellow card for his stick being up high, and then it was increased by the off-field disciplinary committee to a suspension. And at Rahidas's red card was a red card. I will argue that for as long as I can. And I think, Alan, to come back to your point, is that it is the Olympic Games and it is the culmination of everything. And particularly when you get in the playoffs, if you lose, you're going home and your Olympic dream is over. Full stop, no second chances. And therefore, it has a different impact. The Olympics by title are a greater event than a World Cup. And so consequently, it does do different things in your mind. I've been lucky enough to be there on the field, and it does have a different impact point. And so consequently, tempers flared. It's a physical game these days, and there will be those moments. But I don't think we should try and sterilize our sport because it's an honest intensity, and people can then look back on it in the cold light of day 2, 3, 4 days later and go, well, okay, that's how I see it. That's my value set. And I accept it or not. And then the officials will then control it in a way that makes it still accepts it, but puts the discipline in place when it's needed.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I always think if you took that, the Chinese Belgian incident where the player got hit, if you took that in and that happened in the second minute, we wouldn't be talking about it.
Yeah.
Not simple. And it would have been dealt with probably the same way, but there's no way a player would have deliberately hit the ball into another player. I think it's just not in the sport. It just happened to just everything aligned, and that's what happened.
Yep.
But Simon, thank you very much once again, and thank you for all the videos that you were able to get and chat to a good few people. They were great. I said it throughout. It definitely broke up people listening to me for 30 minutes and listening to someone who actually knows what they're talking about. So, thank you very much, and it was definitely a great performance on the pitch by all the teams, I think, and it's something to look forward to and see what happens in the sunny climate of LA in 4 years' time.
Yeah. Well,
indeed, I'm working on the principle that I'm working on the principle this has obviously gone so well that we're just going to base the next one out there for the three of us, right? We'll just
yeah. So I think
I have my flights booked.
Yeah,
I'm all
flights
right.
booked, hotel sorted. We've got a wee room that we can just sit at the beach and do it from.
We're commuting from San Francisco.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, whatever it may be. I tried to bump into Tom after he jumped off the roof, but he got away a little bit too quickly. So I haven't had a chance to speak to Mr. Cruz yet. But we'll see what strings we can pull.
Absolutely.
But look, Simon, again, thank you very much. We do really appreciate your time and knowledge and input. It really was fantastic. Thank you very much.
Very welcome.
And thank you very much for watching. As always, leave what you could think your Olympic moment is down below in the comments, and remember to like and subscribe. And you can listen to us if you don't want to watch us, which is once again fair enough.
It's a good option
on Apple Podcast and on Spotify. But thank you very much for watching.